What is up, you guys? This is JP, and today we're gonna go over a mental checklist for powerlifters and strength athletes. So, today we're gonna go over a mental checklist for powerlifters and strength athletes, but even though this mental checklist and these tips are aimed for, people lifting heavy for powerlifters and strength athletes, these can still benefit you if your goal is hypertrophy or bodybuilding, but they're just not going to have, like I said, as much of an effect for you because things might be a little bit different. But these are some tips that kind of help me when I'm training to make better gains and to kind of also, I don't want to say set expectations, but put my head in the right place before I start my workout. And sometimes even now, even like literally to this day, workouts that I've done in the past week, and I'm sure some workouts I'm gonna do in the next week, I forget to tell myself these things. And if I'm gonna try to learn to sit there and tell myself these things before I start the workout and even in between my sets. These are some pretty valuable tips that can help you make more gains in the long run. And just a quick note, why I say this is aimed more towards powerlifters and strength athletes is because a lot of powerlifters and strength athletes, especially now in the last coming years, are starting to use more forms of auto-regulation in their training. They're using RPEs and RIRs. If you don't know what that is, I have a different video on that, but RPE and RIR is just a way to gauge proximity to failure. But powerlifters and strength athletes are more and more, and it's just becoming more and more people are starting to use that to be able to auto-regulate load for that training session of that day. It's kind of getting smaller, and it's still a huge portion of the population, but it's starting to get a lot smaller that people kind of just go, balls to the walls and go to failure on every single set. So auto-regulation is becoming more and more prominent with, like I said, strength athletes and powerlifters. It's definitely still happening for people who have goals, hypertrophy-based goals and bodybuilding-based goals, but I think from my experience of what I've seen, it's to a lesser extent. So that's why I would say these tips are definitely aimed more towards powerlifters, and just the tips in general are aimed more towards getting stronger, but again, they should still benefit you if your goal is to gain muscle mass or if you're trying to pursue bodybuilding. So the first tip on this mental checklist, and this is something you want to do before you start your workout. Literally as you're walking in, you could literally tell yourself these things during your warm-up. So the first thing is to tell yourself to stick to the RPEs or stick to the RIRs that are assigned for you for your working sets. So again, like I mentioned, if you don't know what RPEs are, it stands for rating of perceived exertion, and it's just a way for you to dictate proximity to failure. Another way of saying RPE is, at least for lifting wise, is repetitions in reserve or RIR. I'm not gonna go into defining that this video. That's a topic for another video. There are many resources to look those things up, and plus this tip is for people who already have this prescribed in their program. But if you're using a program or you wrote yourself your own program that has RPEs and RIRs prescribed for your sets, make sure you stick to them for your sets. I cannot count how many times myself I would get a little greedy with my sets, whether it's my top set or whether it's not, my back off sets or anything. It could be an accessory lift, it could be my secondary lifts that are meant to complement my main lifts. Literally to this day, sometimes I get a little greedy and I tend to overshoot my RPEs and my RIRs. I train a little closer to failure than prescribed. Now it might be the opposite for you, where you leave too many reps in the tank. You train at too low of an RPE and you're not getting all the benefits of those sets. You're not getting as much of a stimulus as you need. But I find that to be a lot less often for people who are already using these in their program. So if you're an individual who's already using RPEs and RIRs, most of the time these types of people want the most gains. They're using programs like this, and they're doing programs, or they wrote their own program because they're pretty serious about lifting already. So the problem is, again, like me, is I don't want to say it's a guy thing, because it could be a lot of girls can do it too, but I tend to say is I'm a guy, I want to get stronger, and I tend to push things a little bit more than I should, and I always try to eke out that extra rep, and sometimes, it's not that I'm being dishonest with myself, but sometimes I think that, you know, I might have, you know, 1 to 2 reps in the tank. It's really an 8 or 9 RPE, but, you know, maybe it's because I'm trying to be tough. I'm like, oh, you know, that was just a 7 RPE. But really, if I sit there and ask myself, is it a 7 RPE? No, it's probably an 8 or 9 RPE. So you got to think, you do that over multiple sets, over multiple days, over multiple weeks. You now have a little bit higher fatigue than you're trying to have, because the whole point of having RRs and RPEs is to manage fatigue. You know, when fatigue is too high, it's gonna, you know, bleed over into subsequent workouts, which means that your total volume is gonna drop, your set quality is probably gonna drop, and it's gonna lead to less gains across the board in muscle mass and strength. So the reason why you have those there to begin with is to make sure that you're training at that appropriate proximity to failure. So remind yourself, first and foremost, is stick to the RPEs, stick to the RIRs. Do not get greedy. As much as you want to, as much as you want to slap on a little bit more weight, don't do it, because you need to play the long game. This is, you know, it's a cliche quote, but this is chess, not checkers. If you try to think in the short term and you try to get as much strength in the on a micro level, on the short term, on a day-to-day basis, it's gonna lead to worse gains in the long run. The second tip that you should tell yourself before you start your workout, and you could actually tell yourself this between sets too, is that for every exercise you're doing, obviously you want to control the negative. So when I tell you this tip, don't think I mean to dive bomb in the negative or don't control the negative. You always want to control the negative, but what you need to do is you need to lift fast on the concentric portion of the lifts. When all is held equal, besides the velocity of the lift, everything else is held equal. When 2 lifts, you have 1 lift A, 1 lift B. If for lift A, you lift slower than lift B, so lift B, you're lifting faster on the concentric portion, you're going to get better strength gains in the long run. Think about it like this. If you have the same weight with weight A and weight B, or set A and set B, but B, you're lifting the load faster, you have to apply more force if it's the same amount of load for you to lift it faster. So when you're lifting intentionally, you're trying to intentionally lift faster, you're basically applying more force to that load over multiple reps, multiple sets, and over throughout weeks, which again, that's you continuously applying more force into the bar. And again, the name of the game when it comes to powerlifting or strength training is to be able to produce the most force. So, you know, when you're thinking about it rationally, it makes sense, but this also makes sense on the research side. Literature has shown that strength gains, you get better strength gains when you lift fast on the concentric. So always remind yourself that. And this one is something where this tip is probably something you need to remind yourself more often. The RPE and RIR tip is definitely something you want to do at the beginning of the workout, but for me, a couple times, 1 or 2 times, maybe once at the beginning and once in the middle, is a good kind of audit for myself to stick to the RPEs and RIRs. But for the velocity, for lifting fast on the concentric at high velocities, that's something I constantly need to do. Quick kind of segues. Sometimes I'll even catch myself doing the set and thinking about something random. It could be a bill I gotta pay, it could be something random. And I don't do this all the time, but sometimes when I do, I'm like, I'm totally not lifting as fast as I need to lift. And again, it's these little things that's gonna separate you know, those advanced lifters from hitting a PR or not, okay? So at the beginning, being a beginner, you're gonna be hitting PRs left and right. But over years and years and years and years and years, the difference between you hitting a personal record on a training cycle is, did you get lazy mentally during those sets? Did you lift with maximal intent on the concentric portion and try to lift as fast as possible? So that's something you probably wanna remind yourself a little bit more often than the first tip that I gave you, and it's something that's gonna help you make more strength gains in the long run. All right, my final tip to help you make great gains is to make sure you don't read into tiny progressions too much. And another way to phrase this is don't beat yourself up if you're not constantly making, you know, PRs every single time you get into the gym. And this sounds like a more general term that anyone can say, or a general tip that anyone can say, but I'm talking about more on a minute level. Me being someone who you know, uses RIRs and RPEs to auto-regulate you know, my working set loads and my top sets. Sometimes when I'll have 1 week, like week 1 of my training program or week 2, and then I come to the next week and I do a set at the same load and it's a higher RP. I'm like, this is the exact same weight I did and this feels a little harder than it was last week. it doesn't matter what I tell myself, and I do reason with myself, and I talk to myself. It does sting a little bit. And if you're a strength athlete who values getting stronger, or you're a power lifter who values getting stronger, and you're just someone who likes getting stronger in general, if this is something you take serious, we all know that it stings a little bit to lift a load that we lifted last week, and it feels a little harder. So the reason why I say don't read into it too much is because there's a lot of things that you just cannot quantify into one set at that moment. You have fatigue bleeding over from workout to workout. You might not have ate the exact same amount of carbs as you did last week. You might have got an hour or less of sleep. You start adding in all these little things. So you're gonna have, you might feel better one week and you might feel better another week. And you can't always go off of subjective feelings. That's not telling the whole story. Sometimes you can subjectively feel better, but you can objectively perform worse. So again, try not to take, week to week or day to day fluctuations in performance to the heart too much. And if you're not breaking records every workout, don't beat yourself up too much. The only time you should really care and matter is if you're not making strength gains over the long term. If you go with a whole 13-week cycle, 15-week cycle, and your performance dropped, that's probably something you shouldn't beat yourself up regardless, but that's something you should probably take a step back and say, okay, what do I need to change? What do I need to alter so I can make better gains? But on a day-to-day or a week-to-week level, again, you probably, most likely 99% of the time, need to do nothing at all, stick to the program, and changing stuff and worrying about it too much is just gonna do more harm in the long run. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave them down below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. If you guys like this video, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. For other fitness related content, go to my website.